Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of the one and the only, the Form Check Friday. Yes, we're here. We're going to dive right into it. So we left off last week with Cam. Now, Cam's doing some bench press here. Cam is an Australian guy. He said recently he failed a 1RM attempt on his bench, spent 2 years rehabbing his shoulder, so just kind of getting back to the point where he's able to push for even PR attempts. 110 for 5 on this set. And the first rep he's doing comp, and then the rest are touch and go. So he was wondering about variations that can help, ways he can program for better progress. And I asked for people in the last video to leave their comments about what helped them get past bench plateaus. And I think for a lot of people it was gaining weight, right? I know for me gaining weight certainly helped. I think the biggest thing I'm going to recommend based on this video, Cam, is probably just pause all your reps. You know, that would be a really simple solution to get better and put a little bit more focus on the bottom end of the range of motion, right? If we look at a lot of the literature, it would suggest that you're going to get stronger in the range of motion that you train specifically. So instead of going into touch and go reps after your first rep, why not do a big set of 5, all comp paused? Now, the other thing you can do to try to build a little bit more consistency off the chest and consistency with your press overall is try to develop a little bit of a lighter touch. Now, this is something that's maybe somewhat contentious, right? This isn't necessarily the only path or the only way of doing things, but it looks like here we do drop the bar a fair bit. We see the elbows flare out a little bit. We see the shoulders elevate a little. So we're going into a looser position as we hit the bottom, and I think that for most people, it's going to be really hard to kind of recover from this position, right? And it's going to be inconsistent in how we recover from this position. So if we look at how you come off the chest here, we actually kind of have to press it back a little bit. The bar path is a little wobbly because we have to press it back, but then we have to get the shoulder blades back down. So you see the elbow kind of wobble during that first rep, right? We kind of have to readjust as we go through it because we got loose in the bottom and now we're trying to get tighter as we go back through, you know, the concentric phase of the movement. And my argument is that if you were tighter on the chest, if you at the very least maintained more upper back tension, even if you're going to loosen the bar here, that's fine. If you're going to do like a sort of like not dump and heave, that maybe demonizes it a little bit, but if you're going to do a hard touch, right, then make sure you maintain that upper back tension. The other thing is this toe picking here, and you kind of can't see because I'm maybe a little in the way, but toe picking, I think a lot of the times betrays a lot of stability issues and doesn't provide as much stability as you can get with feet flat. So I would play around with your foot position. And honestly, the number one thing I can recommend for people stuck in a bench plateau is just bench more often, right? Unless your shoulders are beat up, in which case you should probably bench less. For most people, if you can implement pressing a few times a week or an additional time a week, a lot of times increasing frequency will be my first go-to with people. Even if it's just light stuff, right? Like it doesn't even have to be RPE 7 and up. This can be like RPE 5 and 6, like light practice work to get a little bit more movement in. The other thing I find really useful is additional hypertrophy work for the upper body. For most people, that is a sort of area that lags a little bit. Depends on where you got your start in powerlifting. A lot of people, if they came from like being gym bros, a lot of the times they'll have an easier time progressing their bench because they have more musculature in their upper body, to put it simply. And a lot of people who maybe came from a more sport background who didn't maybe focus on bench pressing, so like anything other than American football and rugby, you know, probably did a lot more leg work, a lot more squatting, a lot more of those things. And a lot of those lifters maybe don't have as much of that upper body muscular development. So, you know, you look at good bench pressers, they often look like good bench pressers, right? You can see by looking at a guy most of the time, a guy, girl, or whatever, whether or not they're a good presser, right? So if you want to build your bench up, try more frequency, try building a little bit more muscle. All right, our next lift comes in from Reese. Real quick before we go into the next lift, just want to let you all know, if you're interested in getting your videos looked at, go ahead and send them to formcheckfriday@gmail.com. We got a video in the description box below. We still get people asking in the comments, how do I submit my video? Just go to the description. There's a whole video on it down there. Also, make sure to check out the Calgary Barbell program training app. You can go to programs.calgarybarbell.com. It's a full feature-rich training log, complete with programming, access to a private Discord where myself and the coaches are doing form checks, answering questions, and we are releasing new programs on the regular. And also calgarybarbell.com, you can check us out for all of your coaching needs. All right, now Reese is doing a deadlift here. He's doing 4 at 9 RPE. So he says the RPE is about 9.5 to 10. So this is a pretty maximal effort lift. He says he struggles to keep tension in his upper back and lats and loses back position near the end of his sets, right? So a lot of the times when we run into these issues towards the end of the set, it's kind of a natural progression of breakdown and is more indicative of fatigue than it is of any real cueing issues. And, you know, if we're looking at a set that's RPE 9.5 or 10, it's probably totally fine that you're seeing some technical breakdown and almost completely expected. So you can see here on the last rep, you get a little bit out of position, right? We start to see more of the back position lost as opposed to earlier in the lift. And then we get to here and we get a little bit impatient. So you toss the knees under the bar and you try to lock it out straight up with this little bit of like hip motion, also known as hitching, right? So in a meet, that's going to cause the bar to move, not only move up and down, but it's likely going to be called for supporting the bar, even just momentarily on the thighs. So when you get into these reps, the trick here is really just to stay patient, right? You likely very much had the strength to grind that rep out, but if you stop short, push your knees under, shift all your weight towards your forefoot, and try to like shimmy it up like that, like kind of hump the bar up, for, you know, to put it crudely, you're going to end up getting called in a meet, right? And we don't want to be practicing this way, because then if we get to a competition setting, then we end up making those same mistakes, because, you know, your worst rep in training is likely what's going to happen in the meet in a lot of cases, right? So if every time the weight gets heavy, you squat high or you don't pause or whatever, like those are probably going to be the same issues you face in a competition. So we want to work to try to minimize or eliminate those reps as much as we can. Now, in terms of the deadlift itself, it looks like you're doing a really good job pulling into tension. You know, we're pulling the slack out of the bar. We got a lot of bracing through the upper back. We're pulling the lats and shoulder blades down. We got a good push off the floor. We're staying in position over the bar until close to lockout. We just need to be a little bit more patient with that lockout and probably just train a little further from failure. Right? If we're running into these technical issues at the end of like every set or a majority of sets, it's likely because we're just doing too much with too heavy a weight, right? In training, I would say most of the time we want to stay away from seeing those technical issues crop up, right? 80% of the time was a heuristic that Mike T liked to use, was the 80% rule. If you can do 80% of your reps with, you know, 80% good technique, then you're good. So if this is representative of like the odd set or, you know, a sort of like testing set at the end of a block or something like that, that's fine. We're going to see a little bit of technical breakdown when you're really sort of putting your foot down on the pedal. But if this is indicative of what most of your training looks like, then there's probably something bigger picture that's causing you to repeat these issues, right? And it's probably that you're just using a little bit too much weight. So maybe just train lighter and, you know, work on having more reps where you're successful, or more reps where you're not running into these technical issues simply by modulating the load on the bar. All right. Now we have Elisa. So Elisa is a first-time submitter, struggles hitting depth with heavier weights, sometimes struggles with balance, and says that every so often her heels will lift up. So the biggest thing I can see here, so number one, when people say they struggle with hitting depth with heavier weights, that generally just means, again, like we need to practice with more reasonable weights, right? If you're putting a weight on the bar routinely where you're getting either like psychologically intimidated or psyching yourself out for whatever reason, that's really common sort of early on. And I think, you know, that's a really normal thing. One of the biggest things that we work with in powerlifting and try to fight with back and forth often throughout the first number of years of our careers is trying to figure out how tight can we be versus how deep can we go. So tightness versus depth is this interesting sort of push and pull relationship where the tighter you get and the more tension you maintain into the bottom of your squat, the higher you're going to squat. And the deeper you go, the kind of looser you have to get down to that position. So it's a constant push and pull, and finding your balance within that sort of paradigm or within that sort of bipolar relationship can be really, really tough when you're first starting off. So it looks to me, Elisa, like right now you're getting to, I would say, 2/3 of the way down, and then from this point here you're really just kind of dropping into the bottom, right? There's a real sort of lack of contraction, lack of tightness, lack of control as we descend into the bottom position of the squat. And I think with that, a lot of the times we're going to see the hips kind of come forward, we're going to see the knees come forward, we're going to see it come up on the toes. Those are all totally normal things when we kind of sort of dive bomb into the bottom of a squat like that. And the biggest solution is just going to be try to squat your lighter reps and these sets like this a little bit tighter. Try to maintain a little bit more control. Perhaps work on using some tempo or some paused squats, or tempo pause squats are a favorite of a number of the Calgary Barbell coaching staff. But that's going to really help you figure out where your foot pressure should be in the bottom of your squat, how deep you should go, sort of what position to assume in the bottom of the squat. And it's also going to help you psychologically just get comfortable down there and confident to be able to take a squat right to the bottom, regardless of what the load is on the bar, as long as it's, within your capabilities. And I think a lot of those things can help. So in terms of the rest of your squatting, you actually have really, really good patterns. Like your bracing looks super spot on until we get right into the bottom of the squat, when we're seeing like a little bit of rounding out of the low back. But again, we get loose, bracing suffers a little bit. So I think you could maintain this really nice brace from the top all the way into the bottom of the squat if you just tightened up the bottom position, squat a tiny little bit higher, and figure out where you sort of sit in that balance of tightness versus depth. And I think working on that, focusing on that, and just filming a lot of your sets from the side is really going to go a long ways for you. So best of luck with that. I think you have the sort of blueprint for a really, really good squat. I think you have a lot of potential there. So keep it up, Elisa. Okay. That's not our next lifter. This is our next lifter. So we have Dan doing some bench, and Dan says shout outs from a garage gym in Ohio. Cool, man. Shout out. Lifting on and off for a few years, coming back from being detrained. Again, just going to take a quick opportunity to plug the old COVID comeback program, the Calgary Barbell program, made for those coming back from quarantine. You can go ahead and check that out, calgarybarbell.programs.app. But anyways, I digress. So he's been lifting on and off for a few years, like I said. This is 245 for 5 at an 8. And he says he tried a wider grip, but it causes some wrist discomfort. So my question would be, when you widen your grip, are you still trying to tuck your elbows really hard? Because I think a common thread among, a common tendency among more close grip bench pressers is they really sort of lean on that cue of tucking the elbows in pretty hard towards the sides. Because generally speaking, for a closer grip bench presser, we're going to see more elbow tuck. We're going to see more external rotation in the shoulder. We're going to see that elbow tracking down here, whereas wider, we're going to see that elbow flare out a little bit, right? So I would, play around with some wider grip stuff. If you're asking for a way to try to implement wider grip, we'll phrase it like that for a sec. I would say, number one, don't go too wide. And this can go for anybody who's trying to implement wide grip bench pressing and has had some sort of roadblock, whether it's like shoulder, wrist, or elbow issues, flaring up or anything like that. Number one, don't go extremely wide right off the hop. Go like a finger's width or two, right? Like here, you're really narrow. You're inside this, the line in the knurling. So I would say just go to like pinky on the knurling. See how that feels. If that feels good, go a little bit wider. If that feels good, go a little bit wider. And eventually you can kind of like work your way out to wherever your ideal grip width is going to be. Now, the other way to approach it could be to simply implement like a wide grip bench press day, right? So instead of taking all your comp metrics, and what I mean by that is the amount of weight you're pressing, the number of reps you're doing, the number of sets you're doing, and all that kind of stuff, the intensity overall, and just moving all of it wider, implement a secondary or tertiary or even quaternary day where you're doing a wide grip bench press with lower expectations, with maybe lower volume, so that you can get used to benching like that. Because a lot of the times we go from like a really narrow grip to a super wide grip, and we're like, oh no, messed up my shoulders. And it's like, well, were you trying to bench the same weight you bench, with this grip, with this grip? Because if so, like, yes, that's a very different demand on the shoulders. Not necessarily that it's worse, but that it's different demand on the shoulders. Anytime we change that stimulus, we should be accordingly allowing the body time to adapt and create a resilience in those positions, and strength and stability in those positions. So we need our training to be specific, and we need to come up with good progressions for load in these new positions. Now, let's say you don't want to change your bench grip, because I always try to approach these from two different camps, right? Is like, maybe this guy wants to increase his grip width, and he's just confused and trying to like figure out how to do it without bothering his shit. And maybe he's like, no, I've tried it, I'm not going to go wider. So, nice Sally. I love that Sally at the end. So this looks like some kind of PR attempt, I guess, then, hey? The other thing I would do is, like we were saying with Cam, is just pause more of your reps, right? Implement long pause bench, implement time where your bar is loaded and it's on your chest and you're in control of it. That is honestly such an underrated tool in bench pressing. And I think a lot of people seem to like, we're just going to watch that Sally over and over. I think a lot of people tend to like avoid that bottom position almost, because they have this like touch and go where all their training is touch and go. But it's like, if you know, for most raw lifters, it's that first few inches off the floor where everything starts to fall apart. Either we lose positioning and it dies higher up, or it just dies right off the chest. So spend time in the bottom position. Don't be afraid to exaggerate pauses or implement pauses, you know, especially if you're going to compete, because I really do think that's a big thing. So the other thing, Daniel, is that you said this is 245 at an 8. So if that's an 8, I would love to see what those last 2 reps look like. And I'm not just trying to put you on blast here, but this is a 9.5, maybe 10. Right? So if you're going to use RPE, make sure you're being honest with yourself, and, you know, maybe use some AMRAP testing to see what things feel like. You know, if that's an 8, like, okay, let's do 245 for 7. Let's take it right to a 10. Show me what you got, right? And that's maybe more of a coaching strategy to, you know, help lifters identify where RPEs or what RPEs feel like, right? A lot of times people have trouble judging RPE, and sometimes, like, yeah, just take it to a 10 so you know what it feels like. But this to me looks like there's probably not 2 more reps there. So, you know, if you take this mentality and apply this to, like, all of a sudden now we're benching wide, I'm just gonna do some sets at an 8, kind of no wonder things got a little bit aggravated, right? All right, up next is Alan doing some deadlifts here. Let's take a look. So Alan is from Croatia, so shout outs to Croatia. Working on sumo training for 8 years now, and this is 175 for 5. So he says with heavier sets his hips will shoot up early. He says he's tried a wider stance, tried a narrower stance, but he says it feels awkward and weak. So I think your stance width is actually really good here, man. Like, if we look at the shin angle, it's relatively straight up and down. If we look at the toe angle relative to the femur angle, it all looks pretty stacked, pretty well aligned. So let's take a look. I think the reason that the hips are shooting up is because, number one, we're looking really far down the whole time, and we might be starting with the shoulders just kind of out in front of the bar. So I think if you just pull yourself back and down into the bar more, right? Like, if you pull your hips back before you start and keep that tension back, even if it means your knees come forward a little bit, because I think it looks like right now you're really avoiding any kind of, like, any little bit of your knee being out over in front of the bar, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think people are, like, overly concerned. And I maybe have been in the past, and you've probably heard me cue people to keep their knees more behind the bar. But in this case, I would actually say let your knees come forward more over the bar. It's going to allow you to get a little bit more upright, which in a lot of ways can give you some leverage advantage. And make sure that you're keeping tension down into your hips and starting with a push, right? We want to start the pull with that knee extension. We want to start the pull with quads. If we start the pull and the first thing that happens is the quads go, but the hips shoot up, well, then we're losing tension in the upper back, right? So some of the cues that people can use, or that you can use, is to, people say, like, protect your armpits, right? Think about locking your armpits shut to get your lats to go. You know, think about external rotation, so rotating that elbow out towards the back wall. Sometimes those external rotation cues can help. But the biggest thing is that we just, like, need to get those lats helping to complete the bracing of the back down into the hips. Because right now we're just kind of losing that a little bit off the floor, and I can see where on heavier reps that starts to fail you, right? I think we're starting out over in front of the bar a little bit too much. I think we could pull a little bit more tension out of the bar. And yeah, I think the reps where we keep more tightness in the upper back are much better. than the other reps. All right. And our last one here, we have Eric doing some squats. So Eric says he's been lifting 4 years. Eric's jacked. 6 months of powerlifting focused lifting, he says, squatting 1.5 years of that sort of total 4 years. So he says he sees the arches of his feet caving in, and I'm actually going to, none of y'all can see this. He says that it doesn't seem to affect him. Like, he doesn't seem to have any issues with it. He's not running into any sort of pain or anything like that. But he's worried that, like, okay, maybe this could be an issue later. So my question to chat, or to any of our community members who are going to sort of comment below, is, you know, have you had this issue before? If so, how did you fix it? And do you think it's an issue worth fixing, right? If he's not having any issues from it, do we investigate this? Do we fix it? Do we work to fix it? Is it worth taking weight off the bar? Those are the questions we would ask as a coach. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Go ahead and comment below. Let me know what you think about this. Is this something we should tackle? Is this something we should, you know, take weight off the bar for this lifter? And if so, you know, what are your cues? What are your exercises? What sorts of things would you do to try to address this issue? I will be weighing in with my opinion next episode. So we'll see y'all then in the next Form Check Friday. Take it easy, everybody.